So, the 24-25 season has just finished and we have a lot to talk about. Sorry again, we've been away for a while. It's been a very busy time with lots of business ventures with my good friend Julian, who's currently away on a much deserved vacation. But enough about us. Let's talk about the big news. Ange Postecoglou has now just been sacked. So, we need to talk a little bit about whether or not we think that, or whether or not I think that Ange Postecoglou deserved another season, whether or not we think this is the right decision, and whether or not we think the heir apparent, who is Thomas Frank, is the right fit for Tottenham. Now, starting with Ange Postecoglou, I actually went to the parade. I didn't upload any videos because it was more of a private moment. It's the first time for me, actually, since being a Spurs fan, that we've ever won anything. I became a Spurs fan when I moved towards the area, and I chose the white side of North London rather than the red side. Given this, there's a lot of emotion that goes into it. I believe Ange Postecoglou has given, for me, the greatest moment or the greatest Spurs moment I've ever had. And because of that, I think from an emotional point of view, I'm very sad that Ange has been sacked. I really, really wanted to see what he could do in his third season. We need to bear in mind that had some things gone differently, in his first season he did finish in fifth, and this year, for example, would have gained him Champions League qualification, and we would still not have lost the label of being Spursy, which is to always come up short. He's the first manager in 17 years to win us any silverware, and he's the first manager in 41 years to win us any European silverware. So we need to bear that in mind. He's come in and he said, I always win in my second season, and he's a man of his word. And I think that takes some balls. And I think we need to give him a clap and acknowledge what he's managed to do and the monumental task. We need to remember the managers who've come into Spurs who haven't managed to win silverware. Pochettino got us very close, and got us very close to the biggest, arguably the biggest piece of silverware in world football, in the Champions League. Mourinho didn't manage it. Conte didn't manage it. All these managers are winners everywhere and couldn't break the Tottenham curse. So we need to remember that what Ange has done is sort of uncharted territory. And because of its uncharted territory, I think it's hard to judge. Also, it's a little bit difficult to gauge what the general opinion is, because if I'm very honest, all of the discourse online has been from non-Spurs fans other than Flav. And Flav has mentioned, prior to having just won the Europa League and prior to having the parade and the emotions, was Ange to be sacked. Even actually having just won, he was still Ange out. But on reflection and the emotions he got from it, he also felt that Ange should be given another chance. And the reason for that is football is not a business, but it's being run as a business. And I think if Ange were allowed to stay, it would speak to the emotional side of being a football fan. The tragedy, the glory, all of those things. Now, that being said, in the footballing world and with a lot of sports currently, it is a business. And Tottenham is a very well-run business. And part of the reason it's a very well-run business is they don't make decisions based on emotion. I acknowledge finishing 17th, just above the relegation zone, is atrocious. However, I would say it was not so much saved by the Europa League, but the Europa League is a crown in a shit, is a jewel in a shit crown. So, now we have Thomas Frank. I'm very excited. I think of the available managers, Thomas Frank is probably the best available manager. We were never going to prize Glasner out of Crystal Palace. They've just gotten their first piece of silverware forever. He's just started there, and they've got European football. And we were never going to get Iraola. And Iraola's poor finish with Bournemouth, I think, is a little bit concerning, especially given Spursy's, stereotype that we tend to finish the season quite poorly. It happened in Ange's first season, it happened this season, and it seems to happen every season. Going on from that, Thomas Frank has demonstrated at Brentford an ability to change his tactics, which I think is one of the biggest criticisms of Ange Postecoglou. When the going gets tough, Ange is stubborn and sticks to his ways, except in the final of except for a European final, apparently. So, with that being said, I think it's exciting to have a manager who has shown tactical changes when needed. However, I think it's important to bear in mind that the biggest stick that rival fans beat Tottenham's head over with is not winning silverware. And Thomas Frank, unfortunately, despite being quite a brilliant manager in my opinion and in my estimation, and having, gotten very good results against the big clubs, including Tottenham this year, I think his biggest knock is the knock that has been put against Tottenham for the past decade, which is, Tottenham never win any silverware. Thomas Frank has never won any silverware. And he's coming into a club that now has big expectations. And if I'm very honest, if we give him 2 to 3 seasons, which it seems to be the maximum length, except if you're exceptional like Pep or Klopp or Arteta, unless you're an exceptional manager like that, you tend to only get 2, maybe 3 seasons. Even with, for example, Ten Hag at Man United, okay, a much bigger club, and obviously having a much bigger outlay, was able to win silverware and yet still lost his job. Now, this is to go with the expectations of a club. I would have said at the beginning of this season that I didn't ever expect Tottenham to win silverware, and that's part of the mindset of being a Tottenham fan. We've been to so many finals, we've been so close, but we never get there, and Ange got us there. Is Thomas Frank, when it comes to crunch time, when it comes to a final, will he be able to hold his nerve? Will he be able to outmaneuver his opponent? Will he be able to bring us bigger silverware? Because the bar now is the Europa League, right? So the next cup that we should be looking for is either a serious push for a title, making a deep run into the Champions League, maybe even attempting to win it, and potentially the FA Cup is another piece of silverware that I think is on a par, and even the Carling Cup. Now, I think what's important to discuss here is the difference between Tottenham and other big clubs. When I say other big clubs, what I mean is the likes of Manchester United, and although it's tough for me to say Arsenal right now, but we'll have a video on them very shortly. Chelsea this season, for example. These are clubs who... I need to get rid of this headphone. These are clubs who have expectations of winning multiple pieces of silverware every single season and should be pushing on all fronts. Now, if you're a club like Spurs, I would say we're in this grey area between the lower to the higher. I would say we're in this grey area from just out of the top 4 to the 4th to 5th place club. I think that's where Spurs should be every season, with opportunities to push up higher when, it's our season, when we don't get as many injuries, when we, let's say, fall out of a couple of cups so that we don't spread our squad too thin. Our expectation, I believe, as a club should not be that we are at a stage where we can challenge on all fronts. We can make a deep run in the Champions League. We can make a good title push. We can go deep in the FA Cup, the Carabao Cup, and also any other pieces of silverware. Now, we'll get a chance to see how Thomas Frank performs when under pressure, although not a very good gauge because obviously he hasn't been with the club very long. He hasn't had a chance to really get the squad how he likes it. He hasn't had a complete transfer window just yet. But we will get to see whether or not he's able to at least put up a fight against the best club in the world, currently PSG. So I'm certainly looking forward to what Thomas Frank can do, and I really, really do hope him the best. Part of me will always wish that we had an answer to what Big Ange could have done. And my thoughts are ultimately, thank you, Ange Postecoglou. You've given me the greatest moment in Spurs history that I've ever witnessed, and as a Spurs fan, and I wish you all the best. You are beloved by myself, and I'm sure many Spurs fans. And I could only apologize that we weren't able to give you a bigger chance. Thanks, Big Ange. And Thomas Frank, you've got some big shoes to fill.